when a quiet American neighborhood suddenly outlawed every military banner, past, present, and future, no one expected the reaction that followed. But what started as a simple HOA memo became a nationwide headline. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more true stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. On a calm Tuesday morning, the kind where the sun rises slowly over neat lawns and trimmed hedges, something unexpected happened in Willow Creek, one of those suburban communities where everything looked perfect on the outside, and the HOA worked tirelessly to keep it that way. Residents woke up to a crisp white envelope taped neatly to their doors. It looked routine, just another notice about landscaping or trash bins. But the moment people began opening it, the tone of the entire street shifted. Inside was an announcement from the HOA board. Effective immediately, military banners, service flags, deployment flags, Gold Star flags, and any signage referencing armed forces or military service are prohibited. No explanation, no discussion, no vote, just banned. For most people, it was frustrating. But for one home in particular, it was personal. The home of Michael Lawson, a retired Army Staff Sergeant who had served 22 honorable years, including 2 combat deployments. His small but meaningful display, a proud Army veteran banner and a POW MIA flag, was more than decor. It was a tribute to friends who never made it back. And now the HOA wanted it gone. Michael stood on his porch that morning, letter in hand, rereading it as disbelief sharpened into something stronger. He wasn't a man who raised his voice. He wasn't the type to cause conflict. But he believed deeply in respect for service, sacrifice, and the freedom people took for granted. A few houses down, neighbors were gathering in small clusters, shaking their heads, muttering in frustration. For many, Willow Creek was home to several veterans, Army, Navy, Marines, quiet men and women who carried decades of memories, pain, and pride behind their calm expressions. Michael looked at his banners, fluttering lightly in the early breeze, then folded the letter once more. He removed nothing. He wasn't being defiant, not yet. But he wasn't going to erase history just because a board meeting had gone wrong. By noon, more residents had heard. By evening, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Social media posts circulated. Screenshots of the HOA memo spread like wildfire among veteran groups, local Facebook pages, and community forums. And by the next morning, people began showing up at Michael's driveway. At first, just 1 or 2 neighbors, then a dozen. Then, bikes, walkers, cars, and community members showing up with coffee, signs, and quiet support. The ban had touched a nerve. Willow Creek wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was becoming a movement. And although the HOA board didn't know it yet, this protest would grow so large, so loud, and so powerful, it would reach every corner of the state and eventually national newsrooms. The spark had been lit, and there was no going back. The sun had barely risen when Jack Morrison opened his screen door and stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand. After 2 decades of military service, early mornings were second nature. But on this morning, something felt different. A thin white envelope lay stuck against the welcome mat. The kind that never brings good news. His name printed in bold. His address typed perfectly straight. And in the corner, that familiar logo, Hillside Meadows HOA. Jack exhaled slowly. He already knew what this was about. The day before, Memorial Day, he had placed 3 small military banners on the front of his home. One for the Army, one for the Marines, and one for the Navy. Not for decoration, not for show, but as a tribute to the friends he had served with, the ones who never made it home. It wasn't political. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even permanent. To Jack, it was simply respect. But apparently, someone didn't like it. He tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter, written in the coldest, most robotic language possible. Mr. Morrison, you are in violation of Article 11, Section C of the Hillside Meadows Community Code. Unauthorized display of military banners is prohibited. You have 48 hours to remove them or face fines of up to $250 per day. Jack stared at the page, the words sinking like stones. A slow burn of frustration pooled in his chest. Not because they asked him to remove something, but because they had no idea what those banners actually meant. He looked out across the quiet street. Children riding scooters, neighbors walking dogs, flags waving from a few porches still decorated from yesterday. And then he asked the question that would ignite everything. Why military banners? Why is that the one thing they want gone? He wasn't angry yet, but he knew something wasn't right. Jack had lived here for 6 years. He had seen holiday decorations that were bigger than entire cars. He had seen houses wrapped in LED lights. He had seen inflatable Halloween monsters taller than the roofline. But 3 respectful military banners, those were the problem? No. Something was off, and Jack intended to find out what. That afternoon, he walked into the HOA office with the letter folded in his pocket. Behind the desk sat a woman named Sharon, the kind of person whose smile didn't move her eyes. "Hi, how can I help you?" she asked with that overly polite voice that felt more like a wall than a welcome. Jack placed the letter gently on her desk. "I need to talk to whoever sent this." She adjusted her glasses. "Oh yes, that. The banners must come down." Jack didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger. That wasn't his way. He simply asked why. "They're respectful. They're small. They honor veterans." Sharon tapped her computer. "It doesn't matter what they honor. HOA policy bans all non-holiday banners." Jack leaned back. "That's not true. The Johnsons have a sports banner every football season." "Well," she hesitated, "that's different." "How?" Jack asked. Silence. She didn't have an answer. At least not one she wanted to say out loud. Finally, she said something that would trigger the storm. "Military displays can be divisive." Jack felt something sharp twist inside him. "Divisive? Honoring fallen soldiers? Divisive?" But before he could respond, she added, "Just remove them. It's easier for everyone." Jack walked out without saying a word. He didn't trust himself to speak yet. That evening, as he stood on his porch staring at the banners gently swaying in the breeze, his neighbor, Mr. Thompson, crossed the yard. "You okay, Jack? You look like someone told you they outlawed coffee." Jack handed him the letter. Thompson read it and shook his head immediately. "This is garbage," he said. "Those banners have been up for 1 day. No one's bothered. Except them." Jack sighed. "I don't want trouble. I just want to honor the guys who didn't come home." Thompson slapped his shoulder. "Then honor them. Let's see if the whole street agrees." Jack didn't expect anyone to care. But within minutes, the conversation spread. 10 neighbors, then 15, then more. People came out of houses with confused expressions and crossed arms. Not angry at Jack, but at the idea that something so respectful could be banned. One woman said, "My brother served. This is insulting." Another added, "These rules make no sense anymore." A teenager chimed in, "Why do they care about banners when people park on sidewalks every day?" And for the first time, Jack felt something shift. This wasn't just his issue. People were tired. Tired of rules that had no heart. Tired of decisions made without listening. Tired of being told what they were allowed to honor. Jack didn't plan it. He didn't even suggest it, but the neighborhood had already decided. They weren't going to let the HOA silence this tribute. At that moment, quietly, naturally, without speeches or planning, a protest was born, and in less than 24 hours, it would become something the whole town couldn't ignore. By the next morning, the town felt different, like something had shifted in the air overnight. What started as one veteran being told to take down a simple military banner had now become a spark that lit an entire community on fire. People who barely even knew each other were now talking across fences, sending messages, knocking on doors, and at the center of all this growing energy was one question. How far will the HOA go? And how far are we willing to go to stop them? Across the neighborhood, families were waking up early. Porch lights flicked on. Cars warmed in driveways. Local business. Owners even closed shop for the morning because they felt something important was happening. It wasn't about a rule anymore. It wasn't about a banner anymore. It was about respect, the kind that every soldier deserved. By 7:15 a.m., people began gathering near the corner where Daniel lived. Adults, teenagers, seniors, even little kids holding small American flags they had dug out of attics and dresser drawers. No leader, no speeches, just a quiet understanding. People held thermoses of coffee. Others held handmade posters. A few simply stood with their hands behind their backs, the same way veterans do during roll call. Daniel stepped outside, expecting maybe a handful of neighbors, but instead, he froze. The entire street, both sidewalks, even the grassy area near the park, all were filling with people who had come for him. Not out of pity, not out of anger, but out of solidarity. He didn't say a word at first. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough. A woman approached him gently and said, "You defended this country. Today, we defend you." And with that, something remarkable happened. One by one, slow at first, residents across the street began raising their own banners. Some were Army, some Navy, some Marine Corps. Others simply read, "Honor our veterans," or "Respect those who served." The HOA had banned one banner, but now it faced dozens, and the number was still growing. Cars passing by slowed down, honking in support. A local news van rolled up, cameras already recording the scene. Reporters whispered among themselves, shocked at the turnout. A retired Marine stood on Daniel's front lawn and saluted him. A group of college students offered to create a petition. A pastor from the next street came forward and prayed with a few elderly neighbors for strength and unity. By 8 a.m., the HOA president arrived, and she wasn't prepared for what she saw. Dozens of banners, a peaceful crowd standing firm, a neighborhood united like never before. She walked toward Daniel, papers in her hand, ready to threaten fines again. But the moment she stepped forward, the noise rose, a wave of voices, powerful yet calm. "Let him keep the banner. Respect our veterans. This isn't right." The HOA president froze. For the first time, she was the one surrounded. She wasn't the authority today, the community was. And Daniel? He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't point a finger. He simply looked at her with the quiet strength of a man who had faced real battles and wasn't afraid of this one. And little did anyone know. The biggest headline of all was only hours away. The next morning, the sun rose over Maple Ridge with a strange energy. Like the town itself sensed something big was about to happen. Normally, Saturdays were quiet. Lawns being trimmed, coffee brewing, kids riding bikes around the cul-de-sac. But today, that peace disappeared. Because by 7 a.m., dozens of people began gathering in front of Alan's house. Not just neighbors, not just veterans, not just families he had helped over the years. People from across the town, firefighters, teachers, small business owners, retirees, even high school students, showed up holding homemade signs. Some read, "Honor our heroes." Banners aren't the problem, silencing veterans is. HOA doesn't speak for us. A few elderly couples came with folding chairs. Parents brought their kids, telling them, "You need to see why we stand up for people who served." And at the center of this growing crowd was Alan, confused, overwhelmed, humbled, watching an entire community rally behind something he never intended to turn into a fight. But they weren't just here to support him. They came to send a message. The HOA was not prepared for this. Maria, or as the neighborhood quietly called her, the Queen of Rules, stormed out of her driveway at exactly 8 a.m., wearing her signature navy blazer and clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She had expected one man refusing to follow guidelines, maybe a couple of neighbors whispering, but not this. Not a peaceful, organized protest gathering right in front of her. Not the sight of families chanting, not the signs. Not the presence of off-duty police officers who came simply because they knew Alan. And certainly not the group of 6 uniformed veterans standing shoulder to shoulder, near the curb, flags in hand. Maria marched up to the front yard with pointed steps. Her voice remained sharp, but it no longer carried the confidence she usually wielded. "This is a violation of HOA policy," she snapped. "Gatherings of this size require approval." One of the veterans stepped forward, calm, steady, respectful. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't challenge her. He simply said, "The First Amendment doesn't need HOA approval." Maria had no response. She looked around the crowd and realized she wasn't facing one man. She was facing an entire community, and they weren't moving. The media arrives. At 8:45 a.m., something happened that sealed the HOA's fate. A white van slowed, then parked across the street. A reporter stepped out with a camera crew behind her. Channel 8 News, the biggest local station. Someone had tipped them off. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone who had seen the social media posts spreading through town the night before. But now it didn't matter. The protest had become a news story. The reporter approached Alan gently. "Sir, can you share why this is happening today?" Alan hesitated. He wasn't a man who chased attention. He never wanted exposure. But the crowd behind him, the neighbors who stood in the cold, morning air to defend him, gave him courage. He cleared his throat and looked into the camera, not with anger, but with clarity. "I put up banners to honor the men I served with. They're not decorations, they're memories, and they're the only reason I'm still alive. If honoring them breaks a rule, then maybe the rule needs to change." The reporter paused. The neighborhood fell silent. Even Maria froze, because whatever she thought of him, whatever personal dislike had fueled her decisions, she could not deny the sincerity in his voice. The veteran behind her whispered, "Good job, brother." The moment everything turned. By noon, the story was already online. Hundreds of comments, thousands of views. People across the county were talking about it. Maria felt the pressure building like heat under a closed lid. She retreated to her home, making frantic phone calls to the rest of the HOA board. But it was too late. The board members, who had always supported her decisions, now wanted nothing to do with the fallout. They weren't going to defend her. They weren't going to face the crowd. They weren't willing to be on the wrong side of a story spreading across town like wildfire. And in that silence, when Maria realized she had lost control, something changed. Not in her rules, not in her authority, but in her understanding of who really held the power in a community. It wasn't the HOA. It never was. It was the people. Always the people. The final blow. At 12:32 p.m., the board president, an older man named Robert, stepped out of his SUV, straightened his tie, and walked toward the crowd. Everyone went quiet. They knew this was the moment. He looked at Alan, then at the banners, then at the reporter still filming. He took a deep breath and said words that would change the HOA forever. "The HOA will be reversing the ban on military banners effective immediately. Mr. Allen, your banners can stay, and we owe you an apology." The crowd erupted in cheers. Neighbors hugged. Veterans saluted. Kids waved small flags someone had handed out earlier. Maria stood in the background, speechless, defeated, but perhaps understanding something she'd never understood before. Rules matter, but respect matters more. And honoring the people who sacrificed for the community will always outweigh the preferences of one person. The sun was just beginning to rise when the HOA board gathered for what they thought would be a simple, decisive meeting. They assumed the community would be silent. They assumed authority would protect them. They assumed the residents had finally given up. But the moment they approached the community center, they realized they had badly miscalculated, because waiting outside was half the town. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, many wearing old uniforms they hadn't put on in years. Gold Star families held framed photographs of loved ones who never came home. Elderly widows leaned on canes, clutching folded American flags they had received at military funerals. Parents came with children, teaching them what respect really means. And above them, stretching across the street like a wall of defiance, were hundreds of military banners, the very banners the HOA had tried to erase. The HOA president froze. He had expected anger, but not unity. He expected complaints, but not courage. He expected silence, but instead he found an entire community, awake, unbroken, and louder than ever. News cameras lined the sidewalks. Reporters whispered into microphones. Police officers watched from a distance, completely calm, because they knew the crowd wasn't there for violence. They were there for justice. Inside the building, the meeting began, but no one could ignore what was happening outside. Every time a veteran's banner waved in the morning wind, the board members felt the pressure grow heavier. Then it happened. The oldest veteran in town, 95-year-old, Corporal Raymond Ellis, slowly approached the board. His steps were shaky, but his voice was not. He placed his trembling hand on the table and said, "Those banners outside, they're not decorations. They're reminders of promises we made and promises we kept. If you remove them, you're not enforcing rules. You're erasing history. The room fell completely silent. A board member finally spoke, softly, nervously. "We didn't expect this reaction." Corporal Ellis raised an eyebrow. "That's the problem. You never asked." The crowd erupted into applause, deep, powerful applause that shook the windows. Reporters captured every moment. The HOA president realized they were no longer making a decision. They were making history. After a long pause, the board voted. The ban was reversed. The military banners were officially protected. And the community had won. But the story didn't end there. Because by evening, national news channels picked it up. Social media exploded with support. Military families across the country shared the story, calling it a victory for every veteran who ever served. And the HOA? They learned something they would never forget. You can write rules, you can enforce guidelines, but you cannot silence gratitude. You cannot erase sacrifice. You cannot ban honor. That day, the community didn't just save their banners. They protected their values. They restored respect. And most importantly, they reminded the world that a neighborhood is not defined by rules. It is defined by the people brave enough to stand together.